Greetings, pilgrims, and welcome to another episode of the Polygon Pilgrimage. And today, I've got something pretty cool for you. We are going to be looking at some Substance Designer stuff today, still related to our Battle Royale. We're doing some different versions of the wall. And I want to show you what each of these looks like in turn, but here I have my master graph, and if you're not familiar with the way Substance works, is you create these graphs which have these nodes, and so I can drag the nodes over and connect them up to the different outputs. But we have subgraphs over here. You see there are A, B, and C. So we have 3 different wall textures for you today. And in the end, based upon the thumbnail you'll see, there are 3 of them, and you'll be able to download this package. The link is in the description. And you can take any of these 3 and you can apply it to your wall. But I want to show you how I went about building it here in Substance, just in case you're also a Substance Designer user, or if you're interested in getting into it, I can show you how we went about creating each of these. So let's take a look at what we have. So if I bring up my 3D Explorer, right now nothing is showing up because I need to attach one of these. So let's attach one of these and let it do its computations. And here you can see this is what the wall currently looks like. So we'll make this much bigger here so we can actually see a lot of this. Let's bring this down. There you go. Okay, so this is how our wall currently looks in the project as of current date, if you've been following along. And it's a little bit more transparent because we handle that inside the material, inside of Unity. But this is what the wall looks like, and I'm going to show you how we went about creating this pattern here. But I have 2 more patterns. I want to give you a brief overview, and then we're going to look at in-depth how we created each one. Okay, so let's take our second pattern here and connect that one up instead. And you'll see this generates this kind of like a grid pattern, almost very Tron-like, it kind of reminded me of. So you have these major borders, then you have these sub-borders, and you have even sub-borders, and then we have these little crosses at the intersections here. And the overall effect is actually really cool. The way that the V-Sync is working for the video, my display over on the left, doesn't quite look as cool as it looks right here on the screen. But when you download it and you look at the texture, you'll see this is actually pretty cool. All right, and of course these all glow. These all have emissive to them because we have this energy field kind of thing going on for our wall. Okay, and our third option here, let's take a look at this one. So I'm going to click and drag and connect this guy up. Let that redo, and there you go. You get this really cool sci-fi kind of like, I wanted this triangular pattern, so that's what we have here. But in the background here, if I zoom in real close, we have this little sort of wall paneled look. Now this looks really cool when it's emissive and it's semi-transparent and it's on your wall. So check it out. I think you guys will enjoy this one a lot too. But I'm going to show you in depth how to create each of these patterns. Let's begin with the first one here. You guys are familiar with this. You've seen this before. So I'm going to bring up the Explorer here. Let's drop down into Wall A graph. And here you'll see that it shows me the same graph, but over here, this has changed. So this is actually how this is built up. So again, if you're not familiar, the way this works is each node, each of these is a node, these squares, it has different properties, and by altering, by multiplying, by adding, subtracting these properties, we can create some pretty cool effects. So let's start over here. So there's this really cool node called the Elvius node, and here it is. And it has a couple of options down here, and one of them is that if you want to turn the gradient filled cells on or off. Now the way this node comes is, if I just drag one and drop one into the world here, you see it comes in looking like this, which is cool if you wanted that kind of softer effect. But you'll notice that this is false, this gradient filled cells, but if I hit true, look what happens. Ah, that's really handy for our little honeycomb kind of pattern we want here, right? So that's what we're going to do. So I bring this one in. I've changed nothing up here. All I did down here was say turn this to true, and my intersense width, I'm going to put that at 0.25. All right? And I did set non-square expansion to true. I just out of habit. I don't think you really need it for this. Next up, we're going to throw it into a transformation node. And to bring up a node, if you need to add a node, they're all here on the top, or you can pull from, I think, from one of the menu bars. But I just hit spacebar, and under the spacebar, you can find any node in here. If you just start typing transform, there you go. You're going to find the transform node that you need, and you can bring that right in. Okay, so with that, I'm going to move it slightly. You'll notice here that my offset is on the X a 0.125 and on the Y a 0.25. What I'm trying to do here is get a center honeycomb, center hexagon here, and then line up with the edges perfectly. And because it is a repeating pattern, it's going to work out well when we then throw it into another transform node. And I'm going to move it again by just a little bit, 0.25 and 0.19, just to kind of get it to line up again. But I've also reduced the scale. I hit the divide by half button. So it made it twice as large, if you will, or made the pattern continue. And this is because we're going to do a cool subtraction. So you notice the lines here. This line is going into the top or foreground. Think of these as like layers, the top layer, the bottom layer, okay? And then the opacity down here, the mask, is by how we're gonna do that. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. We'll be using that a lot. So for the blend here, you'll notice that I have my original pattern, but with these really cool cutouts. And these cutouts are actually the lines from this. And the way this works is I've chose subtract here. So what it's gonna do is it's gonna say, take in A, take in my top here, and do a subtractive action of B. So I'm subtracting really A from B. And so by doing that, I have this. So it's going to take out those two. And you get this kind of really nice black and white effect. And by doing this, we now have our large lines here, but then we have these cutouts. And the cutouts look like they're crazy kind of shapes. But really, if you were to continue these lines, you'd see that this would come down here and it would become part of that honeycomb. There's one in here and one in here that you can't see. But because of that, we're going to take advantage of that, okay? So let's leave that as is. Let's come over here, and I'm going to use a Gaussian 1. You'll notice that this Gaussian, I've tiled it at 32 instances. So it's really, really, really small circles here. That's perfect. Let's throw it into a levels, and I'm going to crunch this down quite a bit. You'll notice that I've taken the sliders here. When they begin, they're going to be on both sides, and I've moved this all the way down here. Now look what that does for us. It gives us pretty much black and white. You know, we're going to have white circles with a black background. Okay, but it makes this nice little halftone effect. If you're familiar with old school newspaper printing, this is kind of that effect. So over here, I want that halftone effect, but I only want it, here's my mask, right? So I'm going to follow this line back up. I only want it where there's white here. Okay, so that makes sense. We don't want the halftone on the lines. You notice none of the halftone is on the lines. It's in between the lines, in these gaps. So that's how this masking works, is I'm going to say, put these on here, but only where this exists. And you'll notice that it got really, really dark from here to here. That's because I've also lowered the opacity down to 0.15. Okay, so now with those two things complete, now we combine them. And look at this. So now I'm saying, put this, all the white, on top of this, but then I'm also using the same guy for the mask. We're saying, put this on top of this, only where the white is. And this is the effect you get. Okay, so now we have three things. We have the white, we have the black in here with these cool cutout lines, but then they don't intercede with the circles in the background. So now we get this three-pronged approach. And it looks really cool. And I'm going to throw this into another transform node, and I think I click this 2 times, the divide by 2, to just spread out the pattern more and see it repeating more. And this is actually going to become our base color. Alright, so now, for our normal map, there's no real normal map officially for this because it is an energy field, but I just kind of throw this into here because it's mostly black and white. It will do the translation for you in the background. As a note, I do use the normal Sobel because I like the quality that it gives me. The normal node doesn't really give me the quality that I'm looking for, so I use this instead. Okay, so for our roughness and metallic. So the roughness, think of this as how shiny it is. Or I'm sorry, this is kind of the inverse of how shiny it is. This is how rough it is. So if it is fully rough, white, which we have here, that means that it's not shiny at all. It's completely dull. And the closer you get to black, the more you get to like this mirrored polish. And so we want this to be perfectly white. We want it to have no reflection whatsoever. Same thing for metallic. So metallic is kind of the inverse, saying how metal is this? Is it, you know, shiny cobalt, or is it, you know, very, very, very dull? And so by making it very dull, we make it solid black. All right, so that means this just won't shine like a plate of metal, which would not make sense for our energy field, right? Same thing for our height information. Height, you can kind of create a little bit of an extra bump, kind of like the way a normal map works, but we're not gonna worry about that today. We're gonna have solid black for all of those. So this is actually the same color, just reused through a node here into here. And these were designed so that this row would line up with the output row, so that's why there's extras. You could just connect this directly into there and it would be the same thing. Okay, so we have all of that, but we need to create a couple more things. Our opacity, so we want this to be see-through, and it's really hard to see the see-through on here because we have the emission going, but we do want it to be see-through, so how do we go about doing that? Well, we have these two nodes here, which you can see are pulling from other things. So we're going to go way back to our pattern to this point. Let's come down here, and I'm going to throw this into an invert grayscale. So now I have white lines instead of black. Okay, So we're going to put this into a blend, but first, what is our first input? Well, we're going to take from here, right? And I'm going to say, let's do a levels and crunch this. And I wanted to crunch this. You'll notice I did not touch the top row, but I touched the bottom row. So literally all I've done is lowered the brightness of this, and I've lowered it down to about here. Okay, so that just means I have black in the background, but kind of a gray here instead of a white. So I'm going to put that on top of where I have my invert grayscale. So there you go. Put those on top of here. And this is set to add linear dodge. And what this does is it says keep per pixel on the screen the point at which you have the brightest spot. So that means that when I put this on top of this, there's no need for a mask because it's going to say white is brighter than anything of this. So we're just going to keep it. Okay. So we're going to throw that into a transform 2D again. I think I hit this twice to make this more spread out. And now this is going to be our opacity, which means it will be fully opaque. We can see the lines right here where the white is. The black in the background we'll be able to see completely through. And then the gray will be kind of in the middle. And that's what you've been seeing this whole time. If you followed all the videos up until now, you've been seeing the result of those three things. Okay, so all of that can really kind of go over here. And that's all related to creating our opacity. Now, for our emissive, all you have to do is pick a color that you like. And for the blend, you'll notice that I'm putting the color on top, and then in the gradient here in the background, I'm coming up here and saying, I want this pattern right before we do the 2D transform, which I could take after it, and then skip this node here, but just the way I built them, you know, the way my brain works. So I bring that down and throw it in here and say, add linear dodge. I want you to colorize this, but then again, keep the brightest point. And I'm going to lower the opacity down to 0.75. So there you go. So this is what it looks like. So this is how it's going to glow. And this is how it's been glowing if you followed the tutorials. And then again, a transform 2D to kind of spread it out a bit more. And that's our final output. Okay. So that's the first one. All right. So let's take a look at the other two. And these guys are pretty cool. So here's our grid lines. Grid lines were really kind of neat, and they're pretty simple. So we're going to use the tile generator a lot, okay? Tile generator is a really cool node. You can just give it some inputs here. So we're going to say X and Y, we're going to say 10. So I want 10 by 10. Non-square to true again, that's just my thing. Brick pattern width, I'm going to put it at 0.1. That determines this distance here between them. 0.1. And down here, I don't think I changed anything else in here at all. Let me just double check. Yep, no changes for the rest of that. I'm going to throw this into a levels, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to crunch to the right, all of these values to the right, to make it essentially black and white. I want white lines with a black background. Now I'm going to do the same thing 3 times here, so let me explain each of these settings, and then we'll talk about the colors, okay? So for this tile generator, you'll notice that instead of 10 by 10, it's 20 by 20, and my width is half of the previous width at 0.05. So these are essentially just smaller lines, spaced out twice as much, okay? And nothing else here is different. And again, a levels crunched it down. It's essentially the same levels copied 3 times, but with a different input. Finally, we have a 40 by 40 lines, and this is the smallest I could get it in increments of 10, 20, 40, 60, 80, that kind of thing, to where I did not start getting errors, and it would skip every other line, or to only do every 5th line, something kind of weird like that. So these are 40 by 40, and my pattern width here is 0.02. So these are very thin lines. And again, the same levels, crunch it down. So we essentially just get white lines. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is just apply a color to each of these. And you'll notice that for each of these, I'm putting a color, which is right here. These have been docked. So if you ever see a node like this, you just hit the letter D on it and it will undock it. So you can actually alter this. You can dock it again. I think you can alter it without having to actually bring it up. Let's see if I double click it. Yeah, you can alter it here without having to bring it up. But I like to kind of see it, go, okay. So you can dock and undock. And you can't dock everything, but you can dock something. So these are docked just to kind of save some space. So each of these is a color on the top, and we're blending that over top of our pattern here, right? And then I'm using the same pattern as the mask. And these are all just set to copy, which means you don't even really need the second part there. I don't even have it actually. So it's just color and mask. So saying put this color only where you see white here, all right? And that gives us white lines with nothing in the background. Not black, but nothing. That's important. Down here, same thing, we're just doing different colors. So here's another color. This is for the medium lines, we'll call them, these lines here. And then this is for the tiny, tiny lines in the background. And that's these lines here. Very good. So then we're going to combine all of this. So I start from the bottom and kind of work my way up. So this is a combination of the first two sets of lines. So the thinnest lines will go behind right here. The thicker lines go here. And we need to take the mask of the thicker lines to say put this. So we're putting these lines only where these exist, but we're putting this in the background first. And the combination of that two things creates this. Then we're going to do the same thing, but with this as the whole input to this here. So we're saying put these lines, the big thick lines, only where these lines are, and put it over top of all of this. So you end up with this. So there you go, you have 3 sets of lines. And then that becomes our base color. Very nice and easy. So our normal map, I just choose a standard normal Sabel, so it's just normal input, just in case you could replace this with, you know, if you just drag this in here, if you really wanted to. Again, roughness, metallic, height, those are all the same. Our opacity, we're going to make a slight change because we do want to add in our little stars. And then our emissive is the same thing, we're using this coloring, but then we're going to add in the stars. Okay, so down here, let's take a look. Uniform color, this is, you'll notice it's not quite black, this is 30. And then we're going to say blend, put this color, but put the thinnest lines on top. And put the thinnest lines only where the thinnest lines mask is. And then put that in the background of the thicker lines. So you see we're building it up. So we built it all the way up. So this is the official opacity. But then here we want to blend into the last second our stars. So I'll show you this and I'll talk about the stars in a second. So this is going to go in the background of the stars. These little like check marks, whatever you call them. We're going to put those on top of this. And that creates this, which we feed into the opacity. Okay, so how do we do the stars? There's a node called Starburst. So let's take a look at this. And my settings for this guy are 4 branches, 0 and 0, size minimum of 0.05, size maximum of 0.68, size variation of 0, tiling of 1. And I'm going to put that into a tile generator. And I'm going to say 40 by 40 because I want it to be at the center of all of these. And then I believe everything else is the standard. Standard. Yep, no other changes needed here. Very good. And then what I'm going to do is say under pattern, I'm going to say image input. And then you connect these two together. And it will say, oh, okay, so you want me to spread out this all over the place. Yep. Then it needs to be translated to a color because we're blending colors in at the end here. I'm going to put that on top of that, and this becomes our emissive. There you go. So we'll glow just like this. Very cool, very Tron-like. All right, final one. Let's take a look. Let's go to wall C. Let's give it a second. And here we go. Okay, excellent. So this is a really cool wall. You can see here, let's take a look up close there. And you can see it's quite complex, but we're going to step through it together, no worries. So to begin, we're going to choose a polygon 1. And I'm going to say I want 6 sides, and I'm going to explode it by just a tiny little amount. It took a little bit of trial and error to get this number, but it is 0.0225. And that's just a little bit of thickness here to these black separators. All right, scale of 0.5. Auto scale is true. Everything else is off. No other changes. Then I'm going to throw this into a transform 2D, and you'll notice that I scaled it up just a little bit. And I apologize, it doesn't give me the numbers by which I scaled this, so you just have to scale it up just a little bit. Kind of see there, just kind of from there to there to make it a little taller, and you'll see why in a moment here. So what we're going to do is, this is a pretty common trick. I'm going to do a blend where I take in this pattern, and the second node is the same pattern but with a transform 2D, where I've pushed the offset on the X to -0.5. What that gives me is it gives me basically a row of 3 of these. If you think about it, how this perfectly ends here and then it lines up here, so you could scroll this. I was going to say scale and scroll. You could scroll this infinitely in either horizontal direction, and it would perfectly mirror every time, right? So then we can do the same trick again. So we're going to put this guy on the sheet, but I'm going to also take him, and now I'm going to do -0.25 on the X to move it over by 1/2. And then I'm going to move it up by 1/4, pardon me. I'm going to move it up by 0.5, 1/2. So move it up and over, and you can see how if I put this and this in the middle, when you put them together with add linear dodge, so we keep the brightest pixel for every spot, you get this, okay? Now, this is where the slight scaling was needed for here to make all of this fit. So what I would do is do all of this, then go back and add this transform, and then play with the scaling once you can see this. And here's something you can do. You can double click this to see the output, single click this, and you'll notice now I can grab this handle and make changes, and you'll see the final output here, because you're previewing this node, but you're altering this one, and that's how you can make sure it lines up. So I just kind of zoomed in here and played with the scaling a little bit until I saw that all of this looked pretty uniform. Okay. Now, for the final colorization and all that kind of stuff at the end here, we're going to throw this into a transform 2D, and I think twice again to make it smaller. And this is just a really cool triangular pattern right now, so you can use that as is and go forward, or you can do more of this craziness that I do in here. So I have two different colors that we're going to bring this into. The first is this color, and I'm going to put it at 0.5 rather. So here's the color, 0.5, and I blend that with this as the mask. So only where there's white here are we going to put color down, and then I reduce the opacity by half. Then I also bring it over to here after I do some changes to it. So we're going to throw this into an invert grayscale. So now I'm getting the lines instead of the background. And I'm going to throw this into a bevel node. Now this is designed to create kind of like a slightly hard, but then like think of like a hard edged object, like the top of like a tank, but then just the edges are a little smoothed over, right? So that's kind of what this node is designed for. And it's designed for generating a normal map, but we're going to take the height map output of that and use it as just a grayscale to make some changes to our colors. Okay, so with this, I'm going to set the distance to negative 0.01, and I'm going to say round, 0 smoothing, everything else is normal. Not going to change any of that. And so here I'm going to choose this color, blend it, and I'm going to give it this, the output from this, the height, as the mask. So it's only going to put that color where it sees that. And this is what that looks like for now. Very cool. Okay, we're going to leave that as is. One more thing we're going to do here is we're going to take a levels from this, and I'm going to crunch this down like this. So I'm getting more of the white lines again. I could just take right from here. They're pretty much the same thing. But when I was playing with it, I didn't realize that, and I just made another level. So that's fine. Okay, I know this is pretty crazy. But up here, I have another bevel. And this time I beveled negative 0.02, but I'm beveling off of this instead of off of this. So I'm taking the white here and beveling inward, whereas here I was taking the white and beveling inward as well, but that's where you get those really thin lines like this. Here I'm taking these inner triangle shapes and saying, let's go smooth the inward surface. And you can see what that looks like here. This is a pretty cool pattern it makes. So I'm going to take the output of that and throw that into a blend here, and I'm going to say, put this covering over top of something else we haven't made yet. We're going to make that else something else in a little bit, but our opacity is only 0.25. So it's just sort of like doing a multiply, putting this softness over top of a thing we're going to create in a little bit. So let's jump down here and make that other thing so we can finish everything off. Okay, so down here I wanted to create this background pattern, these like squares. So I'm going to choose a tile random, and you'll see this is what it looks like. And I did put the random seed up here to 4, and then this is at 32 by 32. And I think I did change a couple things. Yeah, under size for Y, I put 0.17. Under position for offset random, 0.79. Random, 0.58. Random constraints is true. And I think that's it. Yeah. So I made one of those. Then what I did was I copy and pasted and put another one down here. And I put the random seed to 0. Okay. And if you look, the rest of this is the same. So this just means that I have two different random positions for all of these things, so we can use them in different ways now. So the first way we can use this is, let's do the top here. So I'm going to say put this pattern only where you see white here, okay? And that's what's going to give me this. Very cool. Then down here I'm going to say, okay, take these two patterns, so this one on top, it just so happens, this one on bottom, doesn't really matter, and just do a subtract. And so you get these crazy white lines, but you notice there's these random intercepts to them. So that's really cool. So that's what we're going for there. So then we have that, so let's hold on to that. Now this, we're going to say, okay, you remember up here we've got this color for these triangles? Let's take that, but I only want that where you see white here. So I'm interrupting it a bit further, so you get this. Very cool, okay. Now this guy is a blend. We're taking a color here, so this color, and I'm going to say I only want this color where you see white here. So there you go, so you just get these little lines, okay. And then I'm going to put that on top of our other pattern, and I only want to put it on top of where you see white lines here, okay. And it doesn't matter that we're actually crossing over these long thick bars here, because we're going to deal with that in a moment. But so we're just kind of generating some, just one layer at a time, putting these things on top of each other. Okay. Final one here. Let's take all of that, and I only want to see that where we see white here. See, like I mentioned, we don't have to worry about the fact that we were kind of spilling over, like here, because then we say, okay, cut all that out. There we go. So now we come up here, we say, now that we've done all that, this pattern we've been working on, here's where we put that in and say, throw this softness on top of that, and we're going to put it down to 0.25, add linear dodge. There we go. Then let's continue over here and say, put this on top of itself. This is a neat trick with add linear dodge. You'll see what that does. It kind of does this like intensification. That's really kind of cool. Now, down here, we're going to put something else. Let's see, what are we putting? We're putting from all the way back here, this guy, we're going to put on top of everything. We're only going to put them where this exists. And it does create a little bit of artifacting right on the edge here. It gets a little fuzzy. But I think because you'll be at kind of a distance and you'll see it once we blend it all together, you can't really tell. But we're going to put that on there. It's hard to get an exact mask out of this because of the diagonals. So it's okay. It works out. So we're putting these thin lines on top of our whole pattern. Then here, I don't think this is necessary, but just to be sure, I'm putting this underneath, and what are we putting on top? We're putting this guy back, putting this guy back on top to try to close off some of those edges. Doesn't really work too well, but that's okay. So then he becomes our final color. There we go. Okay, so again, normal map, roughness, metallic, height, none of that really matters. Here we're going to take this and say, this is pretty good for our opacity. So let's bring this down here and start with that. And this is just a grayscale conversion to start with. All right. And notice that our channel width here it came down to 0.33 for each of these. So this is a grayscale conversion. So we're going to convert this to grayscale. And it's lowered because he's already at 0.25 when he's up here. Throw that into a levels, and I'm going to crunch it down. I want this to be really dark. I want these lines to be pretty much black, and then some of these to be not quite black. Then we're going to blend in on top of that and say, let's bring back these white lines, because we want the white lines to really show up. We want everything else to kind of be in the background muted. Again, add linear dodge. And then this is just to kind of push it over, and that becomes our opacity. And then up here, this is where we had our color. This is just going to come down and say, you know what, this is going to be our blend to throw into the emissive. And here's something really weird, and I don't know why this is, but here's this node. There's nothing strange about it, and I just literally put the output into another blend, and you can see the background darkens a bit. And I cannot explain that. There's no other changes. I haven't done anything to it. I just made another blend node and threw it into it, but it darkened just a little bit, but that's okay. So that's our emissive. So that means it'll glow using this information. And here's what we end up with, and it looks really awesome. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this. I wanted to make sure that I explained all of these to you, and I will provide a couple of things for you. I will provide our substance file here, so you'll have the base graph here, and each of the three graphs you can look at how they work. I'm also going to take this top graph here and just export these textures into the three different ones that we've generated here together. So each of these you'll be able to have for your own use. So you can just substitute these textures in and you know, whatever you like. This is the current one that we have, but if you like one of these other two, you can do that. And you can take this and also learn from it and make your own for your own wall, whatever you want your wall to look like. So I will provide this file along with the outputs of each of these three sets for you. And next week we're going to get back into Unity and doing some more stuff with all kinds of Battle Royale things. I have got a bunch of cool stuff coming up. Thank you all so much for your suggestions, your comments. Keep it coming, guys. Let's keep going. So for today, I just wanted to take a little break from doing a lot of coding and a lot of that kind of stuff and get my feet wet again with Substance. I don't want to lose my skill set here. And I wanted to show you guys, had some questions about how I created these textures. So this is how. So I wanted to show you in depth, so I appreciate your time and attention. And until next time, guys, keep practicing, get better, and I'll see you next time as the pilgrimage continues.